as we bring Ken on, we've got a little update from Dreger on the Cole Perfetti situation from Insider Trading, the latest on Cole Perfetti's contract negotiations with the Winnipeg Jets, courtesy of TSN Hockey Insider Darren Dreger.
I see the Cole Perfetti situation with the Winnipeg Jets. Cole is feeling great, and that's huge for him and the Jets as an organization, given his history of injury. He has worked out hard all season long. They continue to work on the framework of what his next contract will look like. It's likely going to be a 2-year bridge. Again, there's a gap, but there's ongoing back and forth between those two sides.
So there's Darren Dreger saying it'll likely be a 2-year bridge. I may take the L on this one. I've sort of been holding out that it might be able to get a longer-term deal. But let's get to all the latest Jets news. And welcome back from his Italian voyage, none other than Ken Wiebe. We just heard that clip from Darren Dreger. You know, you've been kind of adamant. You kind of thought this made sense for a bridge deal. I guess my question is, if they were just going to bridge this thing, why the hell isn't it done yet? What are you hearing about this, and how quickly do you think we'll have some clarity on Cole's situation?
Sure, Huston. I mean, again, things can change with one phone call, as we always say, but I just think that if the gap is wide on a bridge deal, and again, I'm not saying the gap is wide, but I would just say this: the reason it's not done is because there's still a gap on the two sides, whether that's Perfetti's camp or the Jets, and the comparables I think are maybe where things are getting a little bit mushy, right? I mean, if you're Perfetti's camp, you're pointing immediately to Shane Pinto and saying, well, 3.95 is probably the minimum that you would like to go. And if you're the Jets, you're probably looking and saying, hey, well, Marty Necas's bridge deal a while back was only $3 million. So I just think that they're at the point where, again, all we've heard, Darren Dreger, Elliott, all of the insiders, it's an amicable negotiation. But if it was, if they were at a place where they could say yes, there would be a press release coming out. And that's why I've been saying for some time. And I don't think it's not amicable, but I just think that you have two sides that have kind of put the line in the sand. I think they're definitely going to come towards that middle of the sand eventually. But this is why, Huss, I mean, a couple months ago, I mentioned to you the possibility of missing out on parts of training camp. And again, it's not to say that it's I just think it's more of a normal thing than we might expect. And like I said, past examples, there's tons of them. And I don't just mean the Jacob Trouba example. Josh Morrissey missed part of training camp. Kyle Connor, Patrick Laine, to name a few. So I don't think this is going to stretch on until the end of September, early October. But I do think this was always a bit of a risk on both parties. I mean, us to remind folks, I mean, when you don't have arbitration rights, like Cole doesn't coming out of his ELC, the only real leverage you have as a player is to withhold your services, right? So that's where they're at. And I mean, and if you're the Jets, you're like, well, okay, well, you're going to withhold your services, but, Brad Lambert put on 8 pounds of muscle during training camp, just had a great Young Stars tournament. And by the way, the Jets just traded for Braden Yeager. So again, I'm not saying the Jets are planning to replace Cole Perfetti with Braden Yeager or Brad Lambert, but just both sides are looking at their leverage a little bit differently. Huss, is sort of how I view things from the outside. We know that neither side is really talking. I mean, Cole talked openly in Vegas. We know that. But at the same time, I mean, the fact that he was the representative, I think that bodes well for things moving forward. But I didn't think that it was I mean, I know some folks have wondered if there was something in the top drawer, or maybe they would announce it at the golf tournament. Well, that's just not how things work. When there's a deal, it's going to be announced. They're not going to be waiting for the prime moment to do so. So eventually too, Huss, I mean, it's part of the business. The player loves it here. We know that the organization loves the player. They expect him to be part of the core group, but I just think that there's probably a difference of opinion. And Huss, you've been talking about it all week with people. I mean, the one side of the equation is that Perfetti's numbers per 60 put him in this other category. But those per 60 numbers are inflated by the fact that he had 11 healthy scratches. And, again, there's two sides of the coin, right? So, and again, Cole Perfetti is an excellent player. I expect him to get a deal done, and I expect him to be an impactful top 6 player for the Jets this year. They need him to be one. But I just think that, Huss, the reason why the contract is not done is that there's a big difference between being a 38-point player and a 70-point player, which is what Perfetti can project to be. But right now he was a 19 for 38 guy. And if you're the player and you're the agent, you're arguing saying, well, if he's on the top power play and he's getting a boost of 3 minutes a game, that 38 is going to easily become 50, if not 60. But if you're the Jets, you want to maybe see that production actually happen before you're paying into it. So again, and I'm with you. I mean, there's a lot of case to be made for a longer term deal, but I just think that the other thing, Huss, is that with 3 seasons under his belt, 2 of those seasons were season-ending injuries, and the games played totals were quite low, which also can inflate the per 60 numbers, right? Because what we saw last year from Cole, even though he had a great year and would have, in most circumstances eclipsed 20 goals, he also went 23 games without a goal and had 2 assists during that stretch. So, I mean, the big picture is that the player knows what he projects to be, and the Jets also know what he projects to be, but I just think that they want to see a little bit. Both sides want to see a little bit more about where things are going before they get to that long-term deal.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it would be nice not to have to deal with this again in 2 years.
Totally, and I totally get that.
But, I mean, if there isn't a long-term deal to be had right now, I think it's incumbent on both sides to figure it out because, I mean, the one thing that I think Perfetti is keen to do is get back out and compete and put last season behind him and get out there with his teammates. And the longer this does drag on, it does put him, potentially a little bit behind some of the others. And you make a great point. I mean, there are a lot of young players that are going to be coming in and will be more than happy to take advantage of 91 not being in the lineup in training camp scrimmages and potentially in preseason games if he's not there. Pagnotta just tweeted this out. The Jets have Cole Perfetti listed on their training camp roster despite not yet having a contract. I'm told by a team source there's no deal yet as of this minute. Winnipeg will likely keep Perfetti listed unless he doesn't report to camp, which officially opens tomorrow. Still time.
Yeah, and I mean, just one other quick thing, Huss. I mean, the other issue with Perfetti, and it's not just young players. If you're Cole Perfetti and you want to be on the first power play unit, well, what if you miss 2 weeks and Nino Niederreiter goes into that high slot position and all of a sudden the Jets power play is humming with Niederreiter there, right? So there's lots of things to consider, and we're all looking for the smallest of morsels, Huss, right? I mean, the Jets haven't played a game since the end of April. We're looking at September 17th here. So
I'm looking for a press release, not a morsel.
Okay.
I'm looking for a number of years. I'm looking for an AAV, and I'm looking for 91 on the ice on Thursday at the Hockey for All Center. That's where I'm at.
It's certainly going to be possible, Huss. But again, like I said, it's a patient type of scenario here that's required. So I expect
it's a patience off.
It is definitely a game of chicken and a patience off for sure. Again, I read all the stories coming out of Las Vegas. Luke Fox from Sportsnet, my old colleague, had a great sit down with Cole. Also, he talked a lot about the year. He loves playing in Canada. All of those things. So it's just a matter of this is the one part that a lot of people go through negotiations, whether it's you or I or other people. I mean, we've never been in the tax bracket of Cole Perfetti or others, but the problem for Perfetti is that his negotiation, I mean, both sides are keeping it out, but it becomes public because everybody wants to know, right? You want to know, I want to know, Cole wants to know, Kurt Overhart wants to know, Kevin Cheveldayoff wants to know, the entire fan base wants to know. So I expect this will get sorted out, in due time. And I think in a short amount of time, because, again, I understand that, we know how negotiations work. You have to stand firm. And if you don't stand firm, then you're going to feel like you left something on the table. So I expect that both sides understand the importance of Cole being in camp, being ready for game one. And, like Dreg said, I mean, the best news for Cole Perfetti, Huss, even though it was bad for the Jets to be out in 5 games and him to only appear in one of those games, he was training with Matt Nickel again, and I would imagine that Cole Perfetti is going to be the best version of himself, and he'll be the most impactful player that we've seen since he was drafted 10th overall. And, ultimately that's the best news for both Perfetti and for the Jets. But again, we all can't wait until, we saw the training camp roster come out. Immediately we're wondering who's going to be with whom, right? And will it matter? Will it be young guys with veterans? Will it be all veterans? It's Scott Arniel's first training camp. So we don't have any clues as to where things are at. We know that a couple years back, the Jets rolled out Ehlers, Connor, and Scheifele. But are they going to roll that out again? We'll see soon enough, right? I mean, there haven't been enough hints provided, even though, like the dog that wants to go out for a walk. We've been tugging on the pant leg of Scott Arniel trying to get some answers, but we'll see. And the beauty of it too, Huss, and we know this. And speaking of Perfetti, I mean, on day one, he was the second line center. But by game 4, things have changed. So as much as we want clarity right now, things are where they are, and they're going to be happening. And, I should say too, it's Cam Stewart and Kurt Overhart represent Perfetti, but they're in the same, it's KO Sports. So
KO, our old pal Kurt. We got another training camp situation with Kurt Overhart here in Winnipeg. Sound familiar?
Hey,
this is different.
Player works for the agent. Agent works for the player. Player ultimately decides.
That is true. Hey, outside of training camp though, but let's just go this way for 1 second, Ken, and let me ask you, like whatever the number is, it's going to be 3.5. It'll be 3.7. It's going to be somewhere probably between $4 million and 3.5. If that is what the Perfetti deal comes in, that actually does leave the Jets $2+ million in cap space moving forward. How do you think that affects the roster? What Kevin Cheveldayoff can or will be able to do as we get into the season? Or is that something that they just sort of take advantage of, accrue cap space, and see what happens closer to the deadline?
Yeah, so I mean, we're gonna have to see what happens with Brad Lambert, but I mean, there's gonna be rookie bonuses in there that you got to account for, also. I think
Good
so.
point.
But yeah, I mean, for me right now, the number is going to be used by the Jets as accruing space towards the deadline. But again, you also have to wonder what the health status is and how many guys you're rolling with. I mean, we expect it probably to be a 23-man roster based on the fact that Heinola is waivers exempt. We probably think the Jets will probably carry 8 defense and 13 forwards, but there's tons of forwards in that battle for fourth line duty. So it's tough to tell, but the Jets know that if they have cap space to accrue, that will leave them some flexibility when it comes to the deadline. And again, we'll look at the roster the way it is right now. It would make sense if the Jets would be in the market for one of two things based on how things go, and they want to find out first who's the second line center. I would say right now, if I were guessing, and you and I are paid to look into the crystal ball and see what happens, but I would say the Jets right now probably would be looking for, second pairing defense help at the deadline if they have, some flexibility and money available to them. Now that is under the assumption that the Jets, find their second line solution with someone like Brad Lambert, who's had a great summer, as you and every guest that you've had on has mentioned. So, that's where I'm at today, but things can change an incredible amount over the duration. But I would say that unlike in years past when the Jets have been looking for a second line center, the fact that there's, center depth in the organization now includes Brad Lambert and Braden Yeager, 2 right shot guys who, project, one of them at least will project to be filling that void. I don't think the Jets are necessarily going to be in the, I'm going to use Sean Monahan's sweepstakes, but you could insert Paul Stastny, Kevin Hayes, or whatever name you want to come deadline time. Might they need a winger like they look for in Tyler Toffoli? I mean, that's entirely possible. It'll depend on how things are unfolding, but, based on what's happening, I would say that if the Jets are looking for a rental at the deadline, Huss, it's much more likely to be a defenseman they'll be in the market for right now. But I say rental because the same thing I just mentioned about Lambert and Yeager, Huss, you and I are on the Solomonson bandwagon from the beginning because Solomonson is coming in. That's why I think it's more likely to be a rental they'd be looking for at the deadline. But again, we know the Jets enjoy term, and if they could get someone with term, they would look at that. But we also know that Solomonson is someone that, again, we've talked about this for months. My stance hasn't changed. I think Solomonson needs, the majority of the year in the American Hockey League with the Manitoba Moose. But, if he blows the doors off, I mean, could he be under consideration before that? Of course he could. But I just think that based on the history of a number of players, and I know you mentioned Josh Morrissey as the example, Huss, I mean, we got to still remember this is still the age 20 season for Solomonson, the 2021 season. And I mean, Josh needed a full year with the Moose before he became an NHL regular. So again, I'm not saying Solomonson can't do it. And Huss, I don't think there's anybody in this community that's higher on the potential of Solomonson than I am. But I just think that it's having covered the American League for 10 years, even with the fact that he's played with men and plays with an edge and is physical and all those things, it would be difficult for him to supplant some of the people that are ahead of him on the depth chart. And Huss, I mean, we haven't even really talked about Hayden Fleury at all this summer.
Well, listen,
this is another guy that's
a
first-round pick, I mean, with NHL experience.
Listen, let me ask you this, because you mentioned you think the Jets will carry 8 defensemen.
Yeah.
So Morrissey, DeMello, Pionk, Sandberg, Miller, Villy, Stanley is 7.
Right.
Who's
so
8?
I could be wrong. I mean,
is there a guy that you think? I mean, listen, Elias could be a guy, but it doesn't make sense for him to be an extra.
No. He's not going to be the 8th. No,
exactly. That is my point.
So the 8th is either Fleury or Coughlin for me. So if they plan to go 8, that's what they'll do. And again, as we're talking out loud, given Rasmus Kapari's situation, I mean, Mike and I are working on the training camp preview. I mean, he just sent me a list of the players that are in a lot of people talking about Chibrikov, and for good reason, coming out of the Young Stars, but Chibrikov's going to have to jump over, Mason Shaw, Jared Anderson, Dolan, a lot of guys, Axel Jonsson-Fjällby. And again, I'm not saying he can't do it, but there's a lot of people he's going to have to jump over in order to take work, because Huss on the 4th line last year, Nemestikov, Barron, and potentially Iafallo, these guys are all double-digit NHL scorers. So to me, I love the way that Chibrikov plays, Huss. I love how he played in Penticton, even though I didn't watch the games. The fact that he was in the middle of all scrums doesn't surprise me one bit. But at the same time, I think they're very similar to Solomonson. And again, I understand that people want there to be a turnover in the roster and all those things, but Chibrikov, to me, will benefit more, Huss, in the long run by playing top 6 minutes in the American Hockey League and continuing to work on his skating, Huss, because what were we talking about the series against the Avalanche? The Jets weren't fast enough. The Avalanche are one of the fastest teams in the NHL. And again, Chibrikov has a lot of great skills that he's bringing to the table. He's not a burner. So the Jets have a few players already in their top 6 that, wouldn't be under the, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers speed burst category. So I just think it's important that, again, it's not a race to get there. It's once they get there, can they be impactful players? So, I mean, if Nikita, and you've been talking about this all week, and I applaud you for mentioning how good a season Mason Appleton actually had. And Huss, I want to just expand on that. The best year that Brandon Tanev had with the Jets, he had 14 goals and then cashed in with that 6-year deal with the Penguins. Mason Appleton had 14 goals last year, right? So I understand fans see Chibrikov scoring in game 82 and think, oh man, well, this guy's obviously going to be able to score more goals than Mason Appleton. I mean, Mason Appleton was a highly productive American Hockey League player. So it just doesn't automatically happen, even though Chibrikov, even right now, may be a little bit more of a natural goal scorer, but he doesn't check the way that Appleton does. He's not nearly as good a player defensively, and that's why you're not rolling out Chibrikov against Connor McDavid, Huss, at 20 years old or 21 years old. So again, I'm not here to say that young players aren't going to be in the mix. They're in the conversation, but there's a reason why some of these other players have had as much ice time as they've had with the Jets. Now, again, things could change. You've talked about this all week long as well. The beauty of this training camp, we don't know how Scott Arniel is going to run things. Does Scott Arniel want to see Nino Niederreiter in the top 6 and give Morgan Barron a shot on the third line? Would he want to see Braden Yeager potentially play alongside Adam Lowry and either Barron or Niederreiter or someone like that? I don't know, but that's why we're going to be looking with such keen interest when the Jets get onto the ice on Thursday. But I'm just here to say, as much as I applaud the approach that the Jets are taking, when I look at the players the Jets are bringing back, Huss, I don't see a lot of youth being inserted into the lineup this year for the Jets. Outside of Lambert potentially on that second line, where are the openings? I don't see an opening for Chibrikov to play ahead of Morgan Barron, who, again, is a double-digit goal scorer, who I think has the potential to be a 15-plus goal scorer. Morgan Barron's, 4 or 5 years ahead in the process over a guy like Chibrikov. So while I expect Chibrikov to be in the mix maybe as early as next year, and again, Huss, Colby Barlow had a very strong Young Stars tournament, set up the overtime winner, all those things. I just don't see a spot for Colby Barlow right now with the Jets until at least next year, and then he might even need some time in the American League. So again, I'm not downplaying anything that Kevin Cheveldayoff said about if you're a young player, you're excited about the opportunity. I think there's some opportunity, but I don't think the Jets are rolling with 4 rookies in their lineup this year.
Opportunities also made. Oh, 4 rookies, no.
Outside of Lambert, who's, and I guess you can consider Hanel a rookie, but who else is in the mix for a job?
Well, I mean,
a full-time job.
Well, opening day roster with everybody healthy?
Right.
Probably not. And this is why I say opportunity is in a lot of ways something that you have a big role in creating. None of these guys are just going to be handed the spot. Don't worry, we'll see October 9th in Edmonton. You're on the third line or you're on the fourth line. I mean, to your point, it doesn't work that way. But I think a player like Chibrikov in particular, if he comes into camp and stands out, does all the things that he's been doing well in the American Hockey League and he did in his NHL debut, and can maybe add in some little bit of offense, show some real bite to his game, I think he has the opportunity to make some tough decisions for the team. And then the other side of it, Ken, and Josh Morrissey is a perfect example. Morrissey was destined for the Moose. And then there was an injury on the blue line. And then he got into the lineup and he played so damn well he never looked back. And, for a young player, you have to realize that opportunity or that chance may not necessarily come in game 1 of the regular season. But right now, these next 2.5 weeks is your chance to come in, put your best foot forward, to raise your stock in the eyes of the heavy hitters, the shot callers, the decision makers that, in a lot of ways have your future at stake, and realize that if it doesn't happen for October 9th, something can happen in a week, 2 weeks, or 3 months where you get that chance and you got to be ready and you got to make the most of it.
Absolutely correct, Huss. And that's the beauty of training camp. But I just mean that things change quickly, right? I mean, Hanela made the team last year. He made the opening night lineup. How many NHL games did he play last year, Huss? I got him down for 0. Parker Ford was a guy that we were impressed by in camp, right? Called up at the end of the year, still hasn't played his first NHL game. So, but that's not a deterrent, and that's not to downplay anything. You're 100% right. If you're Chibrikov, of course you're going to be disappointed if you don't make the team, but go out and be the best forward on the Manitoba Moose and be the guy who gets the first call up when that opportunity arises.
Do what Jansen Harkins did.
Absolutely, Huss. That's a unbelievably great example. My point to you being, I expect Chibrikov to turn heads in training camp, but do I expect the Jets to place, one of their contracted forwards on a one-way on waivers to make room for Nikita Chibrikov right now? No, I don't. But if he forces them into that kind of a decision, that'll be a great, happening for the Winnipeg Jets.
Well, I do wonder, Ken, if, and again, let's just use Chibrikov for an example, but I mean, I think you could add, there's a number of players that could potentially qualify for this. I mean, even some of the guys like Anderson Dolan or players that came in that had signed, if they come in and have a great camp and Arniel is like, listen, I want this guy in the lineup. October 9th, I want him in my top 12 that maybe is not of this group. Do you think there's a possibility that one of the veterans might be moved in training camp before the start of the season? I mean, you mentioned a guy like Appleton. Appleton coming off a career season probably has as much value as he's ever had in his career. Alex Iafallo's got a big cap hit that might complicate it somewhat, but he's in a contract year. There's not a lot of, you're not taking on multiple years after this, and there could be some demand somewhere. Do you think that is in the realm of possibility that, a young player forces his way into the lineup and actually forces Cheveldayoff to make a move that they maybe weren't anticipating?
Yeah, Huss, I mean, I think it's much more likely that someone like Mason Shaw forces his way into the lineup than Nikita Chibrikov. And again, I'm a fan of Chibrikov, the player. I just think that he would benefit from top 6 minutes, and I don't see any scenario outside, even with like 4 top 6 forwards getting hurt. Like, he's still behind. Nino Niederreiter is a 8-time 20-goal scorer. If the Jets have an opening in the top 6, it's going to go to Niederreiter because that's the kind of player that Chibrikov wants to become. And Huss, I would also say this, like in years past when the Jets played their fourth line 6 minutes a night, then you and I would be having this conversation about Chibrikov. Right now, the way it's laid out without knowing what Scott Arniel is going to do, the fourth line could be Barron, Nemesnikov, and Iafallo. Iafallo scored close to 20 goals in the NHL. I just don't see that. I don't see Chibrikov today being ahead of Alex Iafallo because he doesn't kill penalties. He doesn't skate the way that Iafallo does. So that's not to say he can't grow into an impactful player, because I think he will. I just don't think – I think the only way the fourth line changes, and I don't see it being Chibrikov, is if they want someone like Mason Shaw, who is a bit of a disruptor, a physical force, a presence. I could see him being on that fourth line. And again, if there are injuries, of course Chibrikov could work himself into that discussion. But I just think that where he's at in his development and based on his skill set, I think it's more likely for him to be with the Manitoba Moose. Now, again, that's not to say don't try hard at training camp, because of course you need to show your best. Show that game 82 wasn't just a, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't just a audition against a bunch of other AHL players, because he is at a place where he needs to be a dominant force in the American League, and then he's going to be in the discussion and show off his skill set. But to me, Huss, I just don't see a lot of openings with the Jets outside of what we expect to see on the Jets' third pairing and the second line center thing sorting itself out with, again, and I've come around on this, and I love the season that Brad Lambert had. I can't wait to see him in games. I think that right now, if I would have said before that it was going to be someone other than Lambert that had the inside track, I think that Lambert has the inside track clearly for that job. And I think that, based on the summer that he's had with Gary Roberts, I have a hard time imagining someone knocking him out of the job. And, again, I had asked Scott Arniel about this, 4 or 6 weeks ago. And at that time, it sounded like Nemesnikov was the inside track on having the job, and he still might have it. But for a team that needs to incorporate some ELC players, I think that Brad Lambert has the inside track on the job. And I think that Brad Lambert, he wants to be in the Wyatt Johnston kind of conversation in terms of being under consideration as, a top rookie in the NHL. And if that happens, that's a massive development for the Jets here if they don't need to use any resources on the second line center job because they have internal candidates that can handle the job, not just today, but after the deadline happens.
Well, and you know what? And to your point, I mean, to use a Dallas Stars reference, if Brad Lambert wants to be the Wyatt Johnston, a player like a Chibrikov or whoever that, is sent to the American Hockey League,
Stankoven all day long,
to be the Logan
or
Stankoven.
Maverick Bork.
Except he didn't play last year.
Well, not a ton, but I mean, he was still the MVP of the American League. So if I'm Chibrikov,
no, I just mean that
I want to be one of those two guys.
The reason I bring up Stankoven is that he played his ass off and he was so damn good they couldn't keep him down anymore. And then they brought him up and he started to produce and he played with them through the playoffs. It certainly is intriguing, and I mean, I think there'll be a ton of focus on Lambert. I'll have a ton of focus on Salmonson on the blue line, but there's going to be some new faces. There'll be some younger players, and much like Harkins, and I bring up Harkins again because I think back to our shows through that training camp, through everything. His name was not mentioned once by literally anybody throughout that entire period, he came back and literally tore the American League apart in November,
Leading
and then
scorer.
got called up and was a player for the rest of the year. I mean, it didn't end up turning into a long-term spot with the team, but, you know, he earned himself enough notoriety, enough experience and game experience that he ended up being attractive to another team and getting that chance. So it's all getting going in a couple days down at the Hockey for All Center. Cannot wait for it. And it'll be good to see you and the fellas back at the rink. And listen, we get right into it, Ken, with a couple days, and then boom, Fan Fest and the first preseason game on Saturday night, which I imagine will feature plenty of young talent if people are thinking about getting out to a game.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And just one other quick thought here, Hassan. And the other battle in training camp that we'll be all watching is the backup goalie job, right? But even with that, so there's 6 preseason games, Huss. I mean, Connor Hellebuck is getting 2 of them for sure. And if he wants a third, he's probably getting a third. So if you're Capo Kakinen or Eric Comrie, like, you're only getting 1 or 2 starts max, right?
Where is the Wiebe meter? Where is the current Wiebe meter on the number 2 goalie behind Hellebuck right now as we approach camp?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Comrie has the familiarity, and, you know, his last year here with the Jets before he signed the 2-year deal was excellent. His numbers were, you know, quite similar to what Laurent Brossoit posted when he was the best backup in the NHL last year. But I would say right now I have Kakinen slightly ahead, like, you know, percentage points
60,
ahead.
40 sort of thing?
I would even say like 55-45, but, you know, again, I think that Kakinen is a guy, Huss, and we had Kevin Woodley on the Kenny and Rennie show on July 1st when the signing was made. Again, we know how much the Jets value Comrie, and you talked about the vibes element and how he's tight with so many players. Kakinen is a guy who, you know, he's a bigger Finnish goalie. He's athletic. He's never really had the benefit of playing in front of a really solid defensive group. So I think that the Jets believe that if you can get Kakinen with Wade Flaherty and playing with a little bit more structure in front of him, the way the Jets played when they won the Jennings Trophy, I think that there's some serious potential there for him to take off. I mean, again, you can look at the sample size of New Jersey, and the numbers were great. But again, it's a 6-game sample. So, and we know that goalie is voodoo, outside of the upper echelon guys. So, I just think that Kakinen probably has a slight edge right now. But I mean, Comrie's coming in with a ton to prove, Huss. We know this. He cashed in on as a free agent. He had the 2 years. There were flashes of brilliance in there. We know he's going to play his behind off no matter whether he's with the Jets or with the Moose. Or again, Eric Comrie doesn't need to hear this, but he could be appealing to another NHL team if there's an injury. So there's no guarantee he gets through waivers. I mean, we saw the odyssey that he had a couple of years ago, and if Comrie plays the way that he can, maybe he forces himself into, potentially stealing the backup job or winning the backup job, let's say.
The one thing I wonder about Comrie, and this is sort of a blessing and a curse, I do wonder if just how great of a player, a teammate, a partner he is in net doesn't make him a guy that is more attractive to, like, if they're not going to be playing very much, what can Eric Comrie do for a Milic in, like, I don't know a lot about Kapanen. Yes. I don't know a lot about Kapanen, but Kakinen, I should say, but I will just say that on the surface, if it was 50-50 and you're confident both guys can do the job playing whenever Connor Hellebuck doesn't go, but you can have the benefit of having Eric Comrie as a bit of a mentor of a guy that's been there for so much, and we know the sort of person that he is, if that might actually work against him when it comes to, a battle for that spot in the NHL, which is obviously where everybody wants to be. He is on a 1-year deal. He's going to get paid either way. But, and I thought it was interesting that both were one-way deals, in that if they're carrying 2 goalies, someone's getting a big ticket to play with the Manitoba Moose. I did sort of wonder if that's sort of where they thought Eric would be, to not only be a guy that they could call up if they needed, but also be someone that could be, a great mentor for a young goalie with Manitoba.
Yeah, for sure, Hassan. And the Moose have always valued that part of the relationship, right? You think back to even when Wade Flaherty was sharing the crease, I think in the time that he was there, he was such a great mentor, but he was also the number one guy. But the Moose have always kind of liked having a partner to share the load, especially like you said, the mentorship role. But Comrie was signed to compete for the number 2 job, and again, if he ends up being the mentor, that's what he'll be. And same for a guy like Kakinen. He would be a good mentor also. But yeah, I mean, it's impossible to not look at it and think Milic, Comrie, both a little bit undersized goaltenders, Western League guys, played in the World Junior. They got a lot of things in common. I think he would be a perfect mentor, but Comrie signed here with the intention of trying to be with the Jets also. So I don't think the decision will be made any other way other than who is playing better at the time. And Huss, we know this. The Jets need 20 to 24 starts out of their backup, and that's 40 to 48 points. So if you want to be a playoff team, you have to be able to get quality starts from your backup, because if you don't, you're going to be below the playoff line. So that's what it's going to come down to ultimately in that battle as well. But like I said, there's only maybe 2 starts available, right? If you're that backup guy. So there's not a lot of time to distinguish yourself. And again, we also know this from when we talk about the Bombers all the time. Practice time is important in these situations as well, especially if in that goaltender situation.
I've changed my mind about the goalie. I think we don't need 25. I think we need 12 starts from a backup, giving Hellebuck 70. I think the reason why he wasn't at his best in the playoffs is that he didn't play enough. He's built different.
Marty Brodeur style.
Get him in there.
Archer's Urbe style.
Yeah,
okay,
79 of 82.
I'm taking the under on the cool bet line on that one.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you on that.